Hello, I'm back in the studio. How's it going? I'm here, Dr. Snedeker, for a podcast, one of the last remaining few of 2021. If you've been following the podcast for the last couple weeks, you know that this podcast will be left in 2021 until the foreseeable future, as such a time where it makes sense to bring it back. But for right now, and for future listeners, these things will always be true. If you dig what I do and you want to support, there's patreon.com/Dr. Snedeker. There's, DrSnedeker.com. There's sharing and liking and following and doing all the things with this podcast to let people know that you enjoy it. And, I was trying to think of what to talk about today because last week was kind of the Thanksgiving episode. This is also being taped before Thanksgiving, full disclosure. So I'm ahead of the curve a little bit going into the holidays. And I didn't want to talk about something that's very, related to the news or related to, politics or something, because it's never fun having a one-sided debate. I don't want people screaming at their car, being like, "That's not actually this is," there's enough of that already. So I'm literally topicless right now. I'm just kind of floating in the ether, hoping to grasp at some sort of thing that makes sense. I think I have something, so why don't we just get into chatting? Isn't it nice to just vamp a couple chords? I love, take this F. The F that's sitting at the top of this chord. I'm playing, for all you chord nerds, I'm playing like a B flat major 7, but I'm adding the 13 in between, so you get that little rub, and then adding the 9th and doubling the 5th on top. And then this is just a normal, C sus 13. You could think of it as a G minor 7 in root position with a C in the bass. You could think of it as a B flat chord over a C and a G. You could think of it as a root position C dominant 13, but without the E. But what I like to do is single notes, especially when there's like a vamp in a song. Like this would be prime for, just like do 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 do, just some bass. Just like groove. You can just change it pretty easy to, keep the F. So what I'm doing there, I'm essentially adding, it's like a B. I don't know if you want to call it it's kind of like a D flat over B, like a C sharp over B, D flat major. This F, D flat, A flat, G flat, B, and then lowering that left hand a half step, so you have B flat and F, and then instead of the B flat, it's the C, so you have this like B flat minor 9. And then, lowering just the root note to an A, Now you have some sort of like inverted F chord. And then you have like an A flat quality, like an F, or like A flat major 7 at this like 13. And then G minor 9 at the 11, and then like a G flat major 7. So that's kind of what, I don't know, if you're stuck on an idea, this can be translated to other areas, not just music. If you're stuck on an idea, put it through as many scenarios as possible. So, what do I want to do with this? Maybe I do change the movement. You could just keep moving through it. Think of the, like apple. It's a fruit, it's a flavor. Maybe you're trying to think of an apple dish, and you go through your cookbook like, I could make an apple pie, apple crumble, apple tart, apple, cider. I could make, like a fruit cake, but with apples, like apple slice toppings. I could make apple muffins, pastries. There's so many options. But you're taking that one apple and you're running it through different ideas of like, all right, can I do this? Well, I would need to go pick up flour, so I don't know if I have this stuff on hand. I only have a couple hours, and I don't really want to add another trip. The same thing with music. This F is the apple, and it's like, okay, F. I like how it's colored right now, but what if we like brighten it up a little bit? Different color, and then back to this. It could be with anything in life. And then you get, sometimes it's just nice sitting on this vamp. You let somebody riff. A little. Just start singing ideas. I can't really sing those notes. And you go outside of the key. I didn't really sing that exactly right, but that came to mind. Music is such a fluid thing. And the people who regularly practice it, they understand how a lot of the world is filtered through their creative lens. The people who aren't inspired by their environment must not be exposed to a lot, and that's fine. But whether it's people writing whole things about trees, or like someone could center a song around like it's called mulberry bush, but it speaks to a broader understanding of living as a young 1970s man in London or something. You know, it can get really specific. You can, you know, practice the. See, I like miss those leaps. You know. It's hard to do interval. I was doing the G, that's why. Fourths are hard. But, you know, I bring this up partially because I'm trying to explain how, through demonstrating how intrinsically music is in me, because I did some of it on this podcast over the last few weeks, but it isn't strictly a music podcast. It's just kind of a riffing podcast. So I thought today I would just give a little bit of a difference in what I do. You know, this is kind of how I think of ideas too. Because I have a lot of ideas that have been just sitting, and I've been putting a lot of time off. I've been making excuses. I've had school, I've had work, I've had busy schedule, you know, when I used to work for Founders, and like, you know, it's just, it is what it is. But it's like, you know, it's fun to brainstorm this way. It's just fun. But, you know, that's, when I mentioned this could translate to other stuff, it's really about context. And you could do this with information too. You know, people like to say like, oh, the media bias is all over. It's like, all right, then filter it through every media bias. Like, don't, you know, like, see how headlines are, like, because that's the thing too with like being a creative. You notice how things are created. Like, you just can't help it, because everything that exists in some sort of medium is a creative thing. You know, if you see like a trailer for a documentary on a, you know, like a court trial that just ended, you know, and you think like, wow, they made that really fast. It's like, no, they planned that. They were going to put out a documentary regardless of the verdict of, you know, any sort of court case, and that's why it's made up, you know, in advance. Or, you know, when you watch a movie, you see how certain camera angles, certain shots, certain attire, you know, there's movies that are just dripping with symbolism, and everything from how a painting is hung on the wall to the flower that the character is fond of or something. Everything has some meaning, and the movies that do it really well, they place it without being explicit, and then leave it up to the intelligence of the viewer to be like, oh, that's interesting. Like if you go watch Parasite, there's so many interesting parallels between how the family, the family that it's featured around, the poor family, what happens when they start to kind of grift their way into the wealthy society, and some of the darker secrets of trying to all, survive at the with this rich family while keeping their secret. But you notice what does it mean when the poor family views a rainstorm versus how the rich family, little things like that. Oh, well, the poor family lives, at the bottom elevation of the city, so they're used to just getting flooded, or having to close windows to prevent flooding because the streets will just become a wave of all the runoff that's coming up from the higher rungs of the city. Meanwhile, the wealthy family that exists, at the higher plane in a modernistic, American style house, the rain to them is just something to view. There's a big wall on one of the walls of the house that just is all glass, and it opens up to the backyard, and they can just watch it like a TV show, and they're like, oh, it's just rain. Ooh, that lightning was scary. But for the impoverished family, it's this will destroy our lives if we don't make preparations. So it's hard to, as a creative, explain these things, because if people don't have any experience creating, they just think it's weird, or you're pointing out flaws, or you're being critical of their you're ruining my favorite thing. It's no, I'm just pointing that out. And you can take this approach to whatever you do in your own career. There's moments of creativity, but there's also moments of being able to see a task and abstract a thing, understand oh, I'm not just doing this as a cog in the machine. Maybe there's a greater purpose. I don't know how other jobs work either, so maybe this isn't as transferable to some things, but if anything, trial and error with harmony and recontextualizing notes and melodies and giving yourself the room to explore, that helps in a lot of different career fields, or a lot of different things you can be involved in. So it's it's just a way to think about stuff. If you need creative solutions to creative problems, whatever field you're doing. So another trick, I guess, that I like to do when I have, let's take away the bass notes. Now we have the context of just these two chords. It sounds like it could be that's very different vibe. It's more soulful, could be gospel. That's what happens if we lower the bass note from an F? Down to D? We could do like a crunchy. There's enough distance where it's still crunchy, but it's not. It could be worse. So now we're at the C. It makes it sound like a dominant to the F. You know, you can start just figuring out all these things feed into each other. I'm doing, a lot of pentatonic. You can, have all the fun with just that. You could change the just try different scales, try different things. Like, what happens if I play E over this? Like, so you can resolve. Like, it sounds weird if you hold it out like that, but you can resolve it. It sounds weird for a second, but you get out. Or like, what about D major? Like if I did that, that's got a very deliberate like a very crunchy, bright clash. But you can use it as a like chromaticism or just moving around those chord tones. You could also do, with the bass line, you could also, add other harmonies that kind of blend into this. Just playing around with you can end it like this. You could do that. Yeah. If it seems like I'm lost in improvisation, is, as much as I can speak and play, to try to think of other ideas and examples, or, I need that brain power. But, it's, and the other reason I gravitated towards this idea of just like playing this music and talking about recontextualizing notes is that's what I want to see the podcast turn into. I want to see it turn into more of a style of video rather than a limiting, like the podcast itself wasn't limiting, but I want to have different presentations of it. And yes, that could continue. I could do, oh, I'm just going to change how this is presented every week. But realistically, I'm only one human being. And, if you're a small business, creatives are small businesses. So you got to understand the scaling up. Like most times I'm doing most things by myself. There's not a lot of extra help. Especially with the podcasting, that's all just me. There's no like, oh, I shoot the content and I send it to an editor. That comes later. That's when I have enough in my Patreon or enough extra income that I can reinvest into the business. There's a trajectory to it. There's an arc. Because now that I've started podcasting, I don't see myself stopping. More so just honing in on what makes the podcasting I do in Mitten Backstage more fun, more engaging. Eventually having like a space setup, but also having like a mobile setup where I could bring, this interface I have, the Behringer X18, to, someone's house and plug in a couple mics and do the thing. Or somebody's studio, like go to another city and go to that person's studio. But as it stands right now, I want to, take what I've learned and done in these podcasts and apply it to future videos and other collaborative things. And there's just, now that things are kind of back on the train rolling more full steam ahead, I need more time for the other stuff, Earth Radio, this new album, all this stuff that goes into behind the scenes. Because that, I guess, is a good quick aside too. When you see an artist on stage for an hour and a half, you have an idea of what we're doing. You hear the songs, you hear the music, all that stuff. What you don't see, unless we have a Gary Vee style documentary crew where they follow us around and just film and clip everything, you don't see, what rehearsals we had, the meetings. Like today, we had a meeting on Zoom talking about, what aesthetically we're looking at for the next record. And when we're, tentative album release window, and talking about what we're going to work on Friday for the mixing session. Like, there's a lot that goes into it. And I don't blame anyone for not understanding that, because most times music is entertainment. You go in, turn your brain off, open your soul to whatever it is, and then you leave. And then you might think about it later. You might have bought an album, or something might have made an impression. And then, maybe some point the focus drops off. Maybe a new artist comes along, maybe focus on other things, and, it's an ebb and flow. But there are a lot more hours that go into music than that are showcased on the stage. And I think that's where some bands kind of lose their way, is they think everything is on the stage, and then they don't pay attention to like what's happening behind the scenes, like who's got control of the funds, who's making the executive decisions, who's doing the work behind the scenes. There, like, so many bands have been broken up because people have an imbalance of work and an imbalance of, what it takes to be in a band. And that's where emphasizing, like, if you have an idea, run it through all of the channels first. Like if I have an idea on piano, sometimes it sounds better on a different keyboard instrument. Like if I go to a Rhodes or a Whirly or, an organ, like sometimes those ideas sound better on those instruments because it fits that character better, and vice versa. Sometimes you get asked to play something on an organ, and then they're like, oh, you don't really know how to play organ. And it's like, yeah, I never said I did. I know how to play keys, and I have an idea of how it works, but I don't have the experience to like shape the tone and ride the volume wheel or the volume pedal, and you know, I can do some aesthetic things, but at a very surface level. Like if it was in the middle of a random band, you'd be like, yeah, that's fine. But if you like exposed me solo, it'd be like, okay, there's some things here and there that could work, and you know, all that stuff. But yeah, just think of the context of a single thing. If that's the takeaway from this episode, is if you're exposed to something and like if it's information, you know, run it through all the systems if you need to. Like, okay, where's this opinion? If it's an opinion, where is it coming from? You know, if it's a critique, who's critiquing and why? You know, you don't have to psychoanalyze everything, but you know, it's good to kind of just be in, you know, keep in mind of your surroundings, because yeah, ultimately you feel better, and don't over-examine in a way that like that shuts you off from actually gleaning information, and more of just like being dismissive of like, oh, it's all bad or it's all good, you know. Especially with a musical idea, like you don't know what's going to happen until, you know, you run it through some different processes. Because you know, I could just stick with this. I could just stick with this as a vamp, and then maybe the rest of the song is just like, you know, something. Something like that. You know, something like that. You don't know what it's going to turn into. Like, oh, we're in a different key now. Well, how do we get back to that? Relative major. Because I landed on an E flat minor in relative major. But I could talk about this all day. You have things to do. I have things to do. I have places to be, and I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to listen to me noodle and play keys. Hopefully you learned something, whether it's musical or maybe a different way of approaching something. But you can, yeah, like I mentioned at the top of the show, there's plenty of ways to support Patreon, my website, all these different things. I'm excited at the top of the year, after this podcast is done, I'm taking 2 months off of my personal socials to work on, you know, focus on this musical that I'll be a part of, and also to just work on my own creative projects uninterrupted by the allure and the mandates that come with having to operate part of your life on social media, so that people can, you know, hopefully see what you're doing and maybe follow you and like what you're doing, and then eventually it leads to support and maybe a brand deal, even though the people who seem to, you know, aggregate the most fans have the weirdest like personalities, like the most vapid, like just like, yeah, whatever, man, whatever you want me to be, I'll just do it. And you know, it's harder when you're like, I don't know, you have opinions. But also it's, you know, it's a new venture. It's not like I've been doing this, like I've been 10 years on Instagram. Like these things haven't been around as long as they feel like, because of how quickly it's sunk into the culture. But anyway, if you like engaging on social media, I'm on it. You can shoot me messages. You can check out what I'm posting, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Snedeker podcast, where I'll hopefully have something a little bit more pointed to talk about, or maybe I won't, and that's just how life is, and you go with the ebb and flow and all those things. But until next time, see ya.